Well, what's going on, everyone? Welcome back once again to the ASCENT podcast. My name is Bryan, and I'll be your guide as we continue to work our way towards self excellence. In today's episode, we're going to be focusing in on how to cultivate a more equitable and fulfilling culture. And we're going to dive into this at many different levels. But to start, we really want to start focusing on our educational system because we feel that that's one of the most important areas as we continue to move forward, that we need to really be cognizant of how do we structure it? What do we make the pieces and parts of the system kind of intertwined so that kids get the education that they need, the education that they are receiving fits and feeds into the technology as we move forward, fits and feeds into our social norms as we move forward, and many, many other things. I have a great panel with me today. I have Vincent, who's with us, and he is really, I'm going to say he's an expert. He's going to probably say he doesn't want to be classified as that, but I'm going to call him an expert in some of the areas that we're going to be talking about, primarily because he has a lot of experience and knowledge. So, Vince, I'm going to start with you, and I'm going to throw a question out. Obviously, when we're talking about educational system and how things are structured, what feeds and supports the educational system as we continue to move forward. One of my greatest concerns is, we're starting to see a bigger divide between what technologies are bringing to the table, how the system is being able to support that from a training and development, getting back to as young as even middle school and obviously through high school and on to college and wherever else it might be, to make sure that people are trained in the right fashion to manage technology is one piece. But then what about the more traditional type jobs where you have laborers, where you have craftsmanship and different things like that? Because I also think that as we move forward, everything can't be in tech. We're still going to need these other industries to continue to be supported. But what do we need to start to think about now and maybe get into place from a cultural standpoint in our educational system to really be able to support us as we move forward?
Aloha, Brian. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, this is a great topic and one that I've spent a lot of years kind of evolving not only on a personal level, but also on a professional level. I think really when I started this journey, I started looking at from my own experiences, from Hawaii, but grew up in Asia, going through a lot of the educational systems there, and then taking specific looks at technology and agriculture and seeing how others around the world have been evolving their own. And the one thing that I think really kind of sits with me as I've gone through this whole journey is looking at the generational side of things. When we think about my parents who are the baby boomers to my generations, Gen X to Gen Y, the millennials and the Gen Zs, and then now to my kids who are Generation Alpha. It's fascinating to see how much our age and culture and the social societal norms and all these things overlaid with the evolution of the internet, the dot-com boom, and now, as we talked about, AI, how
Mhm,
that's impacted and affected things.
mhm,
And I think the thing that really resonates to what I see as this trend is, some cultures, some geographies, some countries have really taken a hard look at, okay, we came out of the World War II, our current generation has never seen major economic strife like wars, etc. And so now it allows our participants, our students, etc., to really kind of take a look at, well, what is life like? And now this whole movement around work-life balance and all these things has really kind of brought it to the forefront. We see things like the Great Resignation as a really interesting data point where we're looking at, okay, people don't want to work for jobs or cultures or environments that are not fulfilling to their own values. And that I think is really the core to look at the values driven approach of what the education and the future of education will be, especially around traditional industries like
mhm.
ag and manufacturing and whatnot.
Yeah, agreed, 100%. You mentioned something there that I think a lot of people, were aware of, and some obviously directly impacted by, the Great Resignation and those kinds of things. So that's a big part of it, and obviously that all kind of grew out of the pandemic and getting us through that. But what another trend I think we're also seeing that I think culturally industries need to get prepared for is what I'm calling the great never apply in the first place. Because as you said, when you get into the newer generations, the younger generations, they are discovering that, why would I go work for someone for 60, $70,000 a year when I can sell stuff on eBay or become an Amazon affiliate or start a YouTube channel and make that same type of money as a solopreneur or whatever you want to call it. So that's another area where I think again, that still all revolves around technology because those are things that are happening on the device that's physically in someone's hand, right? For the most part. So that's another layer to it that I think we really have to take into account as to how that's going to start to impact the availability of workers and people to fulfill the jobs that we do need, in the larger corporation structure. And then how does that then also shift just the normal demographics of what areas people strive to be in when they start their careers and have those types of mindsets.
It's kind of interesting when you're talking. I was thinking about my kids, and when I remember when I was growing up, you have these kind of role models or these heroes. And when I think back of, let's just say, my parents' generation, and you're going through all the different types of job functions or whatnot. Of course, it was doctors and lawyers and engineers and this and another. And then you fast forward to my kids, they're like, no, we want to be YouTubers and
Right.
we
Right.
want to be Mr. Beast. And
Right.
what was it? My soon to be 9-year-old told me, yeah, Mr. Beast is up to 171 million followers, subscribers. I'm like, that's crazy, and he's generating some crazy thing like $1 million a year,
Mhm.
and I'm just like, I can't even fathom what this new type of, it's not even gig economy structure. It's like this whole different type of content generators,
Yeah. Yeah. They are saying that by 2025, which is like next week, when you really think about it, that economy will be worth $500 billion a year. Uh, that's a lot of money, right? Just in people who are doing, online influencers and online selling and YouTube channels and different things like that. There is that much revenue in that. So that is really changing the structure of things. And I mean, and another thing I kind of equate that to, and which is really interesting because you have your big players out there, the larger corporations, and they still, a lot of them traditionally, from a marketing standpoint, would prefer to spend $100,000 on producing a TV commercial, right? Because they think that traditionally that's the way things would work, versus spend $10,000 to promote 100 social media posts, when in today's world you actually get more benefit out of that 10,000 and those social media posts than you do spending $100,000 to produce a commercial. But they haven't made that mindset shift yet, and that's really what we're talking about now, is from a workforce standpoint, educational standpoint, etc. Now's the time where we need to try to get ahead of the curve and not have to be in this reactionary position. And that's really why I want to bring this to the table.
I think at the end of the day, when we think about this particular subject, when we think about the evolutionary side of things, and we talk about, themes like culture, because culture is everything. To me, it boils down to like fear, fear of change, fear of risk, fear of failure, all these things. Because at the end of the day, when you think about, um, our employees, when you think about all these folks that are involved, it's job security,
Mhm.
it's pensions, it's this, that, and the other, and that's really when I think about my reference to the boomer, to the X, Y, and Z generations. Yeah, I mean, we all see it today where Gen Z is not going to rely on Social Security and whatnot, and we see all these different economic things where It's got to have to be something where you truly enjoy what you do, and you no longer look at work as work, but it's
Hmm.
a part of your values. And yeah, the company man, as defined, is that's in the past.
It's in the
and
past.
uh and now it's really about honoring the individual and ensuring that they are invested, they are appreciated, and there's a place where they are respected and allowed to evolve.
Agreed, 100%. And like you said, the company man is definitely a thing of the past. That's generationally. And Chris, I'm going to transition to you because I want to phrase this in a way. Obviously, coming from an industry, restaurateur, and those types of things, as well as some other tech things in your background. Um, just as we've talked about before, maybe what our grandfathers did, and then what our fathers did, and now us, and then moving on to our children, as Vince mentioned a moment ago about his kids now saying, no, I want to be on a YouTuber kind of thing. Um, when we really look at that from a educational standpoint, and how the system is supporting us, back then, you went to school with the thought of, I want to be X, right? So, and that, you come out of school and you go into the workforce and you do X, Y, or Z. And another piece of that is there were a lot of trades and trade schools. I mean, in schools, I mean, it's funny, and I don't think they have any of these programs in the schools today, but we used to have metal shop, and we used to have wood shop, and different things like that when I was in school, because it taught you, and you could figure out or find out if you had a skill for those types of crafts. But where are those things in our educational system today? Is it because there's no value in the marketplace for that because things have changed so much? Or is it just a focus of the natural growth, as we said, Gen X and then Y and then Z, and now we're back to Gen A again? That those things have just fallen off the table. So, Chris, from your standpoint, obviously working in restaurants, and you've a lot of your employees from a restaurant standpoint typically tend to be younger in age, maybe college students who are working part time. What has been the sense you've gotten from where they are from an educational, just mindset standpoint?
Well, first of all, let's kind of back up for a second. So it used to be when we came up, there was typically 2/3 traditional paths. So you either had I'm a product of the Midwest. So okay, so you can imagine we're talking factories, we're talking um, trades, things of that nature. But so typically the two predominant paths were you're either going to pick up a trade, and that depends on where how what kind of household you grew up in, slash maybe even a factory job. That's the third one. I'm sorry, and then the other would be you're going to college.
Mm-hmm.
So those are your typical three paths. And to a lesser degree, there's a fourth one, which was sports. Back when we were coming up, the money that's in sports today was not there. Okay. So, like I said, um, I learned to work from my grandparents who were they were government workers, um, in education. They were school teachers and things of that nature. Um, I've always been a capitalist. I mean, I don't know what it is about me. I saw that was very intriguing to me, watching people, actually make money. And I was supposed to go the traditional route of college. And for some reason, I'm going to guess now, if I look back on it, my entrepreneurial, the vein in my body with that as an entrepreneur kind of skewed that off a little bit because I never finished. I mean, I went, but I never finished. Um, but I also think that those traditional paths are still available. I just don't. I think now we've got a different landscape. So all these new things with the advent of the internet and so far and so on, and even to I won't even say to a lesser degree, the sports route. So you got these kids now that are coming up and they're at the age of 11, 12, 13, they know they want to be a professional athlete. So they pour all their energy into that. You're seeing it every day. And we're big basketball fans, and I'm watching these kids, and I'm like, where did you come from? You know what I mean? Because usually it was a traditional path, and you could see these kids coming. Well, there's so many of them now. You can't, I can't keep up. I mean, I literally can't keep up. But to come back to your point about what I'm seeing from the restaurant standpoint, I think there'll always be room for those traditional trades and job functions, because there's still there. While the segment may be shrinking, there's still a segment out there of folks that want to go. Like I said, from my labor pool of being a restaurant guy, my labor pool is typically either folks that didn't want to go to school or folks that were going to school, and this was a stop-off point for them. So a lot of times you look at it, you look at a potential candidate or somebody you're going to hire, and you're like, okay, I'm going to have them for X amount of time, and you plan that. You know what I mean? So and I'll be honest with you, I don't have a restaurant today. Obviously, you know that. My biggest challenge is, do I want to get back in and have to struggle with this pool of workers that I'm going to potentially have to struggle with, because everybody's not going to be on board with what you're trying to do. You know what I mean? Everybody's not going to be about the mission. They're going to, it's really a lot more gratification to the individual. But what was I trying to say? But like I said, oh God, I lost my train of thought.
That's all right, because I got a question for you, because you brought up a good point. You talked about having to get back into that pool of, what's available out there and events. And this is another point that we wanted to talk about. The mindset has shifted, just of the typical worker and what it is they expect, want, need out of the entity that they work for, no matter what the size, big or small. So and obviously in the economy that we're in right now, the worker is king, because there are more jobs that are available than people to fulfill them, so that they can really demand kind of what it is that they want or need. So Vince, from that standpoint, as a company, and then even from an educational standpoint, what can we start to do to help companies position themselves better so that they are competitive, to attract people to come in and want to go to work for them? Because a lot of that is culturally based too, as to why I want to go work for this company, or why I want to be in this particular industry. There are, I think, a lot of things that we need to look at and start to do to start to position those types of industries and companies in a little bit better light, so that they can get the talent that they need to continue to grow and flourish.
It's interesting. When I went to B school, one of the books or kind of required reading was Jim Collins' Good to Great. And it was looking at why some companies, I think they took the data of like the Fortune 1000 companies, and the data showed that only 10% made it past 10 years. And so you think about some of these major corporations that we had growing up in my parents, and then obviously your and my generation too. Most of those companies are no longer around, most. And then you think of this evolution through the dot-com bubble, which huge, tremendous growth. And then you see this rise and fall where, a lot of folks literally bet the bank on these companies to make it big. And some made tremendous amounts of money, but most didn't. And then you think about this evolution around what's kind of coined conscious capitalism. So the idea is there's this new evolution of the consumer, and we dictate where we spend our dollars. When we're looking at side-by-side products or services, what are some of the key points and key components within why we decide to pick one over the other? And that's that piece in my mind, and many other researchers' minds, where thinking about, I want to support an organization that values its employees. I want to support an organization that allows for gender and LGBTQ plus and BIPOC, and then beyond that too. I want to support organizations that are looking at supporting the environment, doing kind of sustainable practices. So to me, when we think about education, when we think about capitalism, when we think about this whole thing, at the end of the day, it's really this kind of reaffirming values conversation. for the leadership of every single organization, especially those that are publicly run. It's no longer purely driven based on profits. Yes, profits have to be the core, because when you think about industry, when you think about financial sustainability, that trumps everything. But then you also have to factor in what are the decisions we make in terms of our supply chain, and how our supply chain has to ensure that we're not employing child labor, and we're doing things that are, good for the environment. And we're really kind of looking at this longer holistic life cycle. And it's interesting too, when we bring it back to home, where, the three of us are living now, and we look at how native cultures, so we think about whether it's the Native Hawaiians or the Native Americans, et cetera, and how the mentality and the culture and the values are driven around multi-generational decision making. And it's not just through time, but also looking at, let's just say, the commons as another key stakeholder in this, our natural resources, and making decisions that are in the best interest of the commons. That adds this whole other perspective, which in my mind really brings into the whole educational value side and the culture side and everything else too on a greater level. Because if we're not looking at the commons and we're looking at all the different components of how we live, where we live, why we do the things we do, that's really, I think, that values component. Because I've seen so many organizations kind of try to evolve through this and then realize that they're not living their values. They're talking about it, they're idealizing it, but at the end of the day, when they make those very small decisions on, can you work from home? Do we value carpooling? Do we allow for this, that, and the other? I mean, it all adds up and feeds up to this thing, which is in essence where we are today, where we want to be tomorrow, and how we stay relevant.
100% agree with you on that, and that's a great point, because as you said, as you start your company, and you have your organization, and you have your values that you have there, and your company mission statement, and all those other things that traditionally you pull together. But the key component is, are you actually living and breathing those things day in, day out, and in your actions, your planning for what you want to do? And I think that's a key component to it. Is that part of it? We say we are X, but we're acting like Q. You're totally not even in the same realm as to what you want to portray yourself to be. And that also, I think, is where a lot of the confusion comes from for us as employees. The workforce per se, is because we see this and we say, well, yeah, I do want to go be part of that culture. But once I'm inside, then I start to learn that the culture that I thought it was is not the culture that it is at all. And so then there becomes this disconnect of buy-in and many other things that the worker, has for that entity. So then now you kind of have this thing where you are kind of conflicted, right? Because I need a job because I have a mortgage to pay and this and that and the other thing. But so it's feeding that side of what I need, but it's not feeding the other pieces of what I need as an employee too. And I think that's one area that gets overlooked quite a bit, is like, and I want to say overlooked, I'm talking about it from the corporate level, the company level, is what are the true needs of the employees, your workforce, other than the paycheck, getting outside of that box with the paycheck piece of it. So Chris, I know you've had, like, as we said, being in the restaurant business, is that something you've ever really thought about? Because obviously, yes, you're trying to make money and you've got, things that you're responsible for, but have you really given that piece of the pie some thought as to what my employees need other than the dollars and cents?
Well, I mean, to be honest with you, I really think it's really about engagement. So anybody that's working for you, we've talked about this for years. The drinking of the proverbial Kool-Aid.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't care how big or small your organization is, it typically wants to revolve around some type of a culture, and like I said, it doesn't matter if it's a 5-man company or a 50-man company. You have to establish that from the top down, you have to create this culture that you'd like to see. In my case, so you want to. There's a component within that worker that you want to. What I think, for lack of a better choice, you want to activate in them so that it engages them more with your particular service or mission statement of your business. So there's that emotional side. Besides I'm going to teach you how to make a sandwich, or make a burger, or make a smoothie, or whatever it is, whatever have you. But there's this emotional cultivate. It was just go back. You said, I deal with a lot of young. We're talking about young workforces typically, right? So those are the ones that are more, obviously, with the advent of the internet and so many other things going on that you didn't have to used to factor into there. You literally have to try to keep their attention. You know what I mean? Literally try to get them invested in what you're trying to do, as opposed to, I'm just coming to get my check. Now, let's be clear. There are still going to be a lot of them that are coming just to get their check. I get that. You know what I mean? And I don't really have an issue. I don't have an issue with that. My thing is, and our jobs as business owners and folks that are in charge, management, whatever, is to keep them engaged. You know what I mean? Is really to keep them, locked in for whether it's a 4-hour shift, 6-hour shift, or 8-hour shift, trying to keep them as best you can locked in for the mission at hand. We're in my particular instance, we're talking about customer service. That's what we're talking about.
Right.
Take the product out of it. It's still a customer service driven situation. And that's how you get your repeat business out. That's how people keep coming back, is their experience. I was thinking about this when we were doing pre-production, when you talk about robots and AI and stuff like that. Well, that's all grand, and I'm all down for that. But some of this is really about the human experience. Okay. Yeah, you can get, there's stuff like that already in the restaurants, where there's an automated tray that comes out and drops your stuff at your table. You've been seeing that for the last, year and change or more. But like I said, it's really that human interaction that I bank on. I mean, that's what gets me, warm and fuzzy about going to a certain place. It's how I'm spoken to, how I'm addressed. So it's very simple stuff. I mean, we're not talking rocket science here, but to a lesser degree, that now becomes part of the educational system that we've been talking about, because you are really trying to educate young folks that maybe, depending on where they come from, whatever their home umbrella is, how they've been fed, how they've been nurtured. Have they been fed and nurtured to, look people in the eye and address them? You know what I mean? Things of that nature. Like I said, because of the fact that now that we have these communicating devices that, pretty much talk to us, you know what I mean? We don't necessarily have to respond. So you get in those type of things where that whole mindset's been cultivated, where I don't have to talk, so it's an interesting dynamic. I definitely think it's a necessary thing that we can't let it die. We just cannot. I mean, that's society. I mean, I'm one of those type of people that I need human stimulation. You know what I mean? I need somebody to get me going. So I think that's something that us as leaders and us as folks that have been around for a while, we cannot let go of. We just can't. You have to got to keep water in that tree. You know what I mean? And you got to keep emphasizing that. And you got to, like I said, you're not going to get through to all of them. It's one thing I had to learn a long time ago, is that you're not going to get through to everybody. All these young people, some of them, they have a way of shutting you down. You know what I mean? Whether they're sitting there looking at you and agreeing with everything you're talking about, only so much of it is going in and staying in. A lot of it's going in and going right back out the other side. So you have to be conscious of that, and know who you're, if you're paying attention, you'll learn who you're dealing with.
Agreed.
You'll know you'll figure out what the part that they play in your particular organization and how much of it asset they can or cannot be.
Yep.
It's interesting as Chris is talking too, and because of his experience working in the food service side of things and restauranteering, et cetera, I think you've got, I would say, the majority of his staff were millennials, right? And what was it? I think it was Time Magazine was talking about how the millennial generation is the me generation. And it's interesting because I feel like because I know Chris and because I know who he is and because he cares, even though you're right, you need to have that level of authentic customer service, which I am a firm believer. I've always told my kids, get a job in food and beverage because it doesn't just challenge the individual to figure out how to interact with someone, but also you self-reflect on how you want to be treated.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it's so important. And I guess, Chris, could you talk about, how it is where you've cultivated this culture around respect and it's like a parent, you want to be respected, but it's like, I'm going to call you out when you need to be better, or you need to be better, or I need to train you to understand what's going on in talking to a customer, and showing up in the right mindset. I mean, that's hard because that's a lot of self-reflection for all of you.
Yep, agreed. So, Vince, I'm going to throw this to you, but let me kind of tell you where I got this from. And listening to what Chris was just saying, a couple of things came out of that. One, we were talking about, just in general, how he wants to be interacted with and the human experience of it. So, and at the root of it, from a human nature standpoint, we are social beings. We need that social interaction. However, because of the internet and the phone in your hand and many other things that have developed, the medium in which we are social has changed, right? And it's evolved to a little bit different level. So figuring how that murky water of how to keep the true human face-to-face communication, eye contact, whatever else it might be, as part of the skill set that we need, I think is an important piece of it. So that's one part. And then Chris also said something in there early in his thing about top down, from leadership, and the culture starts here and it's top down. And Vince, I'd like to hear your thoughts, especially since you've had experience living abroad, seeing other organizational cultures and how they're structured. And is top down really the best way to structure an organization from a cultural standpoint? And I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that.
It's okay. So what do you got? Options: top down, bottom up. I feel like there's a lot. Majority of the ones that are successful, are kind of a mix of both. Ultimately speaking, especially when you think about the movement of a company, a startup company evolving into a mid-size and then a larger company.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about in the entrepreneurial innovation space, there's a valley of death. And a lot of those references are based off of, the growth, the revenue, the product market fit, and all these other things. But then there's also a really bigger challenge too. And it's interesting whenever now you go to Whole Foods, because that's a fascinating use case. And my reference point is Whole Foods was viewed for a long time as this socially, environmentally, economically conscious organization, in the whole conscious capitalism realm. Yeah. The founder, the whole story, everything. And then now it's owned by Amazon and Jeff Bezos. And, it's fascinating to see the evolution around that organization and what has impacted the culture there from the employees, because you're no longer this kind of grassroots-ish kind of company and you're trying to do good. You're now owned by this gazillionaire. And does that play an impact on, the bottom-up approach, which has been kind of the foundation for a lot of these conscious companies? Because the employee's voice, the community's voice, the consumer's voice has always been in the forefront. And it's a tough one because when you bring in another individual in a leadership role who, let's just say has their own attachment styles, so avoidant or anxious. And then you bring in a lot of imposter syndrome, and you bring in a lot of things in terms of ego and insecurities and fear. And then what does that do to impact the culture from the top down? And then how do you right the ship too, to ensure that there's checks and balances? Because today, now when you see in any organization, that level of transparency, that level of fairness, even down to the degree of the disparity between compensation, like that alone, just start with that one, and you talk about, what is fair, what is right, and then the margins and then the wealth that are being produced for a lot of these organizations. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm. It really is. And, one thing I just made a note, because we mentioned this earlier, we were talking about value, and using that as a term, and that's something that employees look at now when they look at an organization. I want to go work for X, Y, or Z because there, I think I will feel valued, and that kind of thing. So in my mind, when someone says that, then value to me kind of says that would be or equate more to an organization which is bottom up kind of thing versus top down, because the frontline people uh, or appear to have more value and have more influence over what goes on, but that might not necessarily be the case. I think it's all in how you frame it. So I think that's another important part, is to understand, as a culture, as you're creating a culture within your organization, how do you manage and communicate that? And so that's probably my question to you, Vince, is from a communicating standpoint, what have been the trends that you have seen that have been effective? What have been some of the things that you have noticed that, just from your perspective, have not been an effective way that the message is actually getting from the top to the bottom or bottom to the top, in either direction?
I think it's twofold. One is leading by example.
Okay.
At the end of the day, employees, staff, everyone, that are following these cues based on the values that the company has decided to move and hold near and dear. You got to lead by example, and that's a really tough one to do. Going back to the earlier comment about living your values, and then the other one too is, as you said, the communication side of things, and how many times communicated. How is it? How do you have a feedback loop where people or others are not fulfilling those somehow, some way? And really, it's just, in my mind, setting expectations. So, the education side, the training side, the reaffirming side, the bringing the staff together and investing in this community-driven, both on the different departments, but also as a company wide, like that appreciation, that validation piece is so big. And then, but now you have this older separate side, which is the community looking in at the organization and valuing it. And I think that's fascinating to me when we take it back to the generational conversation, where we take it back to the gig economy side of things and bring it to this other thing, is how do you, in this very transactional world where, you go to a restaurant now and you're ordering on an app, you're ordering on a screen, and you're eliminating that interpersonal communication. You're limiting that, and you're taking that whole experience, as Chris would say, is, the value to him of what he wants. And it's likely also that's a generational thing as well, because when we grew up, that was part of it. But now when you eliminate that today and you make it more of a, here's what I want. I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to have that. I take all that out there. I want my happy meal, and I'm out of here. Well, what kind of experience is it now? And even in that McDonald's use case model, you see this trend now where they're creating, these more cafe styles. They're bringing it back full fold in the European markets and the Asian markets, where they're bringing it back. And it's now you have this different level of experience where it's like, yeah, for all those folks that just want to churn and burn, and they're just like, here it is, versus here's the folks that want to sit down, have a really great cup of espresso or coffee, talk to people, experience that. and stay a while. And that's, I think, the change in the marketplace too, based on the change in the generations.
Agreed. So let's bring that back to education, because one of the things you mentioned there, and you're just talking about the kiosks. Now you walk into a McDonald's or pretty much any of the fast food places, and there's not anybody at the counter anymore. I mean, the job doesn't exist. It's kind of interesting. So you go to the kiosk, you key in your order, you pay for it right there, and then they call your number, and you take it and you do what you want to do with it. So a little bit different environment. What can we start to look at from an educational system standpoint to um, help those people who are going to be filling those jobs? Because now having that skill set, as Chris mentioned a while ago, of being able to communicate, have that customer service vibe, those type things are almost not even a requirement of the job. However, that type of interaction is still, I think, an important thing in life, just in life in general. So, but if they're not getting fed that, taught that, trained that by their entity that they work for anymore, going to a customer service class. I mean, we can all say probably sometime in our careers, we had to go through a customer service class because that was part of what it took. I think a lot of the companies now don't even have that as something that they train their employees on, because, well, the kiosk takes care of the customer. Our employees don't. So we are starting to see, I think, a bit of a divide in the educational system for some of those things. And then over time, that becomes a skill that literally falls off the table. And it's not just in the workplace, it is also outside of the workplace. Because part of what we're talking about is education. The other half of what we're talking about here is work-life balance. So there's your work life, there's your life outside of work. So what does your skill set and your ability to communicate, et cetera, look like there too? And what's the responsibility, I guess, of the educational system? Or is it just something the parent is responsible for teaching? I mean, it can really go deep when you start to think about how those things are kind of just falling by the wayside. So I'll start with you, Vince, and then I'll go to Chris next, just to get your thoughts on that piece of it.
There's this really famous quote by Peter Drucker, who talks about culture eating strategy for breakfast and technology for lunch. And, kind of bring it all back together when we talk about the interpersonal communication skills. I remember right out of college, someone told me to read this book, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie.
Mm-hmm.
And, I just reread it again, maybe about a year ago. And, that's the piece too that brings the whole work-life component together. Because when you think about the fulfilling workplace, when you think about the fulfilling life, when you think about as it pertains to work-life balance and how when work is engaging on both sides of it, it's life affirming. And, I don't think we'll ever get away, at least in the next generation or two. I think it's really going to be about aligning and investing. And that investment has to start at a young age. I mean, this needs to be a component when we talk about, pre-K, and we think about investing in our teachers, and we think about valuing, again, some of the most important individuals that are molding our future generations, and ensuring that their values and their lives are taken care of because they're investing in the future generations. I mean, in Hawaii alone, just looking at the value of public versus private education, that's a telling kind of data point where, well, we need to really push that forward. And then you bring it back to the worker side. And I think you mentioned this before, the American dream. Well, the American dream has evolved so much. And, part of me from an economics perspective thinks that, things will eventually work out, however they work out, whichever they work out, because that. But then the other part of me too is looking at models that are a little in the advance. And that's why the European side of things is so interesting to me, because they've been doing things, a lot longer than we have in the United States. So to me, when I see how they work around, local foods and valuing the farmer and farmers markets versus what we're seeing today, which is we go to Costco and we spend $500 to $600 a pop, and we have all this excess and supply and this consumerism. It's a telltale to how we interact both on the private side in our lives, but then also on the work side too. So
Agreed. And you brought up something, and we'll come back to that because I made a note. But Chris, I want to go to you now and just kind of get your feel on um, that whole piece of it. Tying together the what we need from a social norm standpoint, communication, how the educational system, and when I say educational system, obviously that's traditional schooling, as well as what the companies are responsible for training and gearing their employees to so they can be successful. So that whole piece of it.
Excuse me. Well, I mean, I thought of this earlier when we were, I don't remember which segment of what we were talking about, but it has definitely, from my perspective, um, equally important to train your employees or prospective employees on more than just making the sandwich, making the smoothie. Literally, it's putting back the because a lot of times what happens is like I said, you can train these young people. Um, I think you can train them to do almost anything. Now you're going to along the way, you're going to find the ones that are more willing and the ones that are less willing. I think you always have to invest time into all of them. So in other words, if I see one as, you have, it's back to figuring out what people's strong points are. I mean, you have to, that's something that I think sometimes employers, especially on a larger scale, don't look at. Well, what is this person's strength versus their weakness? Sometimes you're going to get some A players that are just, they're ready, willing, and able across the board. And then you've got the ones that you've got to really work with them to get them. You can see this, and first and foremost, you have to be able to see there's skill there. You have to be able to see that. You have to be able to. Well, maybe they're not spit and polished on certain levels, but I can identify some skills within them. They just may not have been cultivated on their home front. I mean, you get a lot of kids that they don't want to have and the exchanges are short, and a lot of times what happens is we're talking about in areas where there's a problem. You know what I mean? I don't think a lot of these young people today have been taught to problem solve. What I mean? It's made into this huge thing, conflict. What I mean? We start talking about conflict and challenge and things of that nature. Those are like really bad words for certain young people. And it's like, they don't want anything to do with it. Now, folks like us, we're actually trained and taught to deal with conflict, to deal with challenge, because a lot of it is, it's a part of our everyday life, having, I say this every day. Somebody, you've heard me say this a million times, Vinny and Bryan, everybody's going through something today. What I mean? Everybody's going through something. There's nobody that's not going through something in their day-to-day life. But as an employer, as a leader, how do we condition the people that we're in charge of, the people that we have working for us, to be able to handle these situations with I won't say relative ease, but where it becomes a situation where you understand how to deal with it, and to not make it to not make it personal, because I think there's a lot of times where you see all these. My mind wants to go back to because there's a million videos out there where somebody was at a fast food restaurant, they had an issue, and the person that was working behind the counter took it personal. Which, now I understand it's hard to not take it personal when because a lot of times the person on the other side of the counter, they don't have great social skills either. So all they can do is go on the attack for what they want, or the perceived slight. You know what I mean? Because you put mustard on my burger and I didn't want mustard on it, or you did XXX and I didn't want that. It's a personal attack on me. So they dig in, and then, it just starts. You know what I mean? It literally just starts. Now, I'm one of those, and I went through this when I had my last, 15 years of having a restaurant / cafe. of having to teach my young people to do their best to not take it personal. This is not personally against you. It's it's the organization. They're after the organization because we have somehow failed them. And you need to understand that this is just a part of that process to be able to try to resatisfy that customer after we've dissatisfied them. So, and this is part of how you move through life. You know what I mean? If you get, these are skills that you work on early, and then when you get to be our age, you pretty much kind of, I won't say we're perfect at it or we've mastered it, but we're actually pretty good at dealing with people's, issue. You know what I mean? On even either on a personal or professional level. So that's the biggest thing I see, and I watch because I'm a people watcher, so I'm out all the time. And you look perfect. One of the perfect examples would be our I guess our self-proclaimed watering hole days. We go to Whole Foods, and we were talking about this last night. I was like, on Fridays, Whole Foods bar is not the place you really want to be. If you want warm and fuzzy, because for whatever reason, that's the oyster night. Those people are tightly wound on oyster night. I mean, you see some of the nicest. We deal with the same people, and they're Monday through Thursday. They are some of the most wonderful people on the planet. But when you come to Friday, their world just goes upside down. They're waiting for the fight. That's what I've been noticing. They're waiting for the fight. They're actually loaded for the fight.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as someone like you last night, Vinny, you were looking for your oysters, right? And the moment you asked, I could see the look on the face, like, why are you asking me about your oysters? Basically when they come type thing. And it's not the norm for what you're getting, but for some reason, those folks have not been trained or educated to deal with something that you would think is very routine in nature. But for whatever reason, it just, I told you this last night, Vinny, I was like, maybe I need to go offer my service. Maybe I need to go offer my services as a trainer, so we can get these people to just be okay. You know what I mean? Just to understand what their challenges to get this, for whatever reason, to get this product to the customer, which seems to be this monumental task, and just get it to where let's bring the temperature down in the room, because I get anxious. I'll be honest with you. I don't order oysters. I don't typically order oysters, but I'm sitting in a room and I'm anxious as hell about something that I'm not even going to consume.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm watching everybody else just get worked up about this, and I'm like, these are grown. Let me back up. The wait staff is not teenagers. They're not even 20 somethings. We're talking people that are in their 30s to late 30s to possibly 40s. And they're having an issue how to deal with point A to point B over oysters.
Yeah. Chris, I want to jump in there because a slight story, similar thing. This is a situation where you've got an employee, valued employee, and has someone who's been with the organization for a few years and has shown value. The company values them, and they get paid X amount, right? A new employee gets hired, and comes to the surface that the new employee is earning, let's call it $1 more per hour than the person who's been there for a year or so. So the person gets upset about that, right? Because they feel like, I've put in the work, I deserve a raise. But and this is where you talk about confrontation and conflict. But instead of going to management and say, hey, I've been here a year, I've put in the work, blah, 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 I feel I deserve a raise, which is a legitimate conversation they have every right to have, they would rather just quit the job to avoid that conflict and that confrontation, and I've seen this happen a handful of times where instead of dealing with the issue, they'll choose the route of quitting and walking away versus actually being confrontational about something that's justified. So it's a very interesting thing. And again, where is that disconnect happening, I guess is my question. So Vince, I'll put that to you first. Is that a educational system disconnect? Is it a cultural thing just across the board because, Gen Z, Y, maybe those types of things? Is it social media, internet? Is it the company's responsibility because they didn't communicate properly that, we have an open door, and if you have an issue, please bring it to us? I mean, what's your thought and what's been your experience with that?
Well, I think for most of us too, thinking about this across the realm, both on private sector, government, etc. The whole question around value as it pertains to compensation is a big one, which is why when you think about government levels of pay grades, it's tiered. So it's really simple. It's like if you do this based on these job descriptions, you get paid this, and you go up from whatever 12 to 13 or whatever. And then even down to the private sector, like the consulting realm, that's all benchmarked. It's shared across the level. I mean, I remember when I was working for KPMG, they told me, I'm like, oh, we need to give you an increase in raise because you're at the lower end of whatever. This is right when I first started off out of college. And I was like, wow, that's kind of cool, because now the industry is defining what the different levels are between analyst, consultant, etc. So, even bringing in the whole value of unions and how unions play a role in being the voice for all staff members and making sure it's fair and equitable. Someone's got to be looking out for you. And I think that what's coming down to this one is that if you're not looking after yourself, if you're not looking and valuing yourself and being willing, and then on the other side of the coin, which is, the ability for your voice to be heard. And again, when I think of your situation that you kind of put together of like, well, if I deserve this and I go to you, well, it's the fear of rejection. It's the fear of this. It's the fear of that, which is why it's like, well, they don't value me, because if they value me, they would have given me a raise anyways.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's a tough one, because I think at the end of the day, the culture of the organization, ensuring and allowing every voice to be kind of put in through when you think you have this. Well, I guess the first question is, going back to your situation, how did this person even find out that they're getting paid $1 less or whatever? Because that's to me, it's like, well, that's interesting, because that brings up a whole separate kind of can of worms.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, well, I'm assuming that these two individuals were doing the exact same job function, or whatever it is, because if not, then how do you justify that this person makes more? So it's kind of, it has to be both. We have to, one, ensure that we set the expectation of our company organization that if you have this challenge or whatever, oh, you're not doing this, this is the reason why you're getting paid this.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the flip side of that too, is you have to be able to, show and set the expectation too, that if you were to increase your certification levels or become more competitive or be able to do more or cross train or whatever, then you are eligible for higher pay or more career opportunities. And, that brings it back to how we first started this conversation, which is, that whole idea of, are you just a task rabbit, which is kind of the whole gig economy, or are you a contributing member to this organization where there is a future career that's going to be in the decades or longer? Or how do you see these individuals staying? Is it going to be this transactional, like in the food and beverage industry, where they kind of come in for a short period of time, but they're not viewed as a lifer or a long-term, and that's just part of the expectation.
Mm-hmm.
And so, again, it always comes down to culture. It always comes down to this. It always comes down to expectations.
Yeah. And like I said, the key component there is how it's communicated, right? Or if it's communicated at all.
If
Another example would be, and obviously the landscape right now, as we said earlier, is I mean, definitely leaning way towards the employee side of having the advantage because of the number of available jobs versus people to take them. And, we're not necessarily talking about doctors and lawyers here. We're Target, for example. Uh, they're, offering whatever they want to pay an hour, 17, $18 an hour, which is a decent wage to work at a Target. But then they're also, to try to get quality people in, offering new hires a $2,000 signing bonus, right? Well, then, well, what about me? I've been here 2 years.
Right.
I may be making that same dollar per hour as a new person, but I'm not getting the $2,000. You know, so where is the equity in that type scenario, and then how is that being communicated internally, if at all? Also, and I think this goes back to Vince, what you were saying earlier about internally from a corporate culture standpoint, how are you showing the value and the equity to your staff, to your employees over time from a mission statement, from a, here are our values that we have within the organization? Because yes, you do have to be competitive, but you also have to realize that you have a base that's already there, right? And then managing that piece of it. So there's a lot of pieces to the puzzle, and can't say that there's a right way or a wrong way, but just more to think about than just, yeah, we need bodies, but how you go about getting that, and then how it impacts the bodies you already have, and many other things all play into the equation.
I think there's actually a right way and a right way. And, the wrong way is going to be a telltale based on retention and, resignation or whatnot, and I think that's another piece in terms of how you factor in the communication and generational side of things too, is, I would say the kind of the older generations are, it's like, if they're not voicing their concerns, they're going to be quitting, or they're quiet quitting is the term that quiet quitting. And then the younger generations are more like, they stir stuff up, and, there's resolve, and you can tell pretty much just looking at their work ethic or whatever. And that's the piece too, to bring it back. It's like, how do you create a culture within any organization that allows for, that being present, that checking in with them, like, where's your mental state, what's going on outside of you, because whatever's happening outside of you is going to impact your work life. And I was talking to someone maybe a couple of weeks ago about this whole idea in the restaurant industry, and how there's this term where when someone is basically just like so overwhelmed, they call out this like audible, and then everyone within the organization just shifts. Like, that person just goes and takes a 15-minute break, and then everyone else just without even question just jumps in. And I feel like that needs to be more involved in all of our side of things, because it's not a matter of if, but when we all just feel overwhelmed. And how do we take care of our community, and hold space for them, and be present and be empathetic? Because holy cow, can you imagine a future where we're always valuing and looking after each other and just going after them? I mean, just think about how that impacts everything in terms of like violence. It's like, just we need to be more present, and we need to have provide the opportunity for people to just say, hey, you know what, stuff happens, we get it, and we're here for you.
Agreed. 100%. 100%. Thanks for sharing that. So the last thing I want to touch on, because we're doing this in a 2-part series, so we have more things that we really want to get into, but to obviously keep this from going on forever, because some of the things we're going to talk about when we do part 2 of this, we're going to get into organizational structures, and really dig deeper into that, and especially non-traditional type organizational structures, as well as talking about management versus labor versus unions, and in this day and age, what that all looks like, and what the relevances are there, and do we even still need unions, and if we do, why, or why not, and kind of digging into that piece of it. And then the last big piece is the equity and equality and gender and race bias, and all those things that obviously impact the culture that you establish, and whatever it is, whether it's a situation, a community situation, school, whatever else it might be. So a lot more to talk about. But one of the things I do want to get into right now is really just talking about from a, I guess, prioritization standpoint. If we were to sit here and say, of what we've discussed so far, in your mind's eye, what would be like the top thing that you think really needs to have some focus, and then maybe the second thing, just from a prioritization standpoint, to try to move us forward as individuals, but more so us forward from a unification entity, educational system standpoint? Well, I'll start with you, Vince, and then Chris, I'll get your thoughts on that.
For me, it's really figuring out, who the individual is, and taking it into my own personal life too. It's figuring out my own triggers. It's figuring out my own attachment style. It's figuring out, this whole multi-generational, you can put as trauma in terms of how the individual is raised and why we think the way we do, why we feel the way we do. And then, it's beyond Myers-Briggs. Growing up, you start looking at leadership style, you're doing this. And then more recently, you're looking at, okay, well, there's a lot more to unpack here. Mm-hmm. And so as I go through my own transformation, evolution, identification, I personally am sharing that with others and asking them, what's your attachment style? Do you even know what that is? And then breaking it down even more, because when you can figure that out, when you can hold space and you can be kind to yourself, and being kind to yourself has in my view, a two-part set of things too. It's we are our own worst enemies in terms of what we believe, what we strive for, what we set the bar up to, because there's so much shame. And then the other side of things is, it's everything else. It's all the externalities too. And being sure and being grounded is so important to us, because life is hard, right? I mean, it's as Chris was saying earlier, you don't know what someone else is going through in their life, and mm-hmm. just being able to, hold space for them and say, what, who knows what happened? Their grandparent or their parent must have, could have passed away just yesterday, or they could be dealing with all this, whatever. Their landlord could have kicked them out or whatever. I mean, again, it's not to the point of like taking it personal on both sides. And that's the piece to me. We got to look inwards before we can look outwards. We got to figure out what our own values and our own culture is before we can then go and say, does this culture, did this organization, align with my values? And if they don't, if there's a disconnect, or even before that, if you don't even know what those are, then yeah, that's why we see this today. And that's really, I think, my own personal component of this is we got to do more. We got to identify, and we got to self-reflect more.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing that. So, Chris, what about you? What would you say from a prioritization standpoint would be something that we could do as individuals as well as entities to just be better and do better from a culture and managing our cultures better?
Well, honestly, I mean, it's, in my mind, it's simple and it's not. I obviously, if you know me, and you guys do know me, I try to operate. Let's say that I try to operate out of a position of caring. You know what I mean? A position of sharing knowledge, a position of opening a door, allowing your people or even your friends to walk through that door, knowing that, if you work for me, I'll bounce back to that. If you work for me, then you know that I tend to run a caring operation. I want to care almost to the, as long as it doesn't affect what we're trying to do. So in other words, I'm going to give you time, because I think we're all at the end of the day, and I said this earlier on, we're talking about a collection of individuals that have been raised, and a lot of them in different, sometimes it's the opposite. The spectrum is so wide as to how one person was raised versus another person was raised. I know that we're going to talk about equity and things like that. But first and foremost, understanding that everybody comes from different backgrounds. The reality is the workforce is typically is a very diverse workforce. I know back in the day, you would try to get these, typically what they met a certain criterion, and a lot of that was a visual criterion to begin with, and then it segued into a little more, below the surface, what you're about, and what your beliefs is, and sometimes even you're not supposed to bring religion into this, but sometimes even that is something that helps you to determine what you're dealing with. But more importantly, I think it's you really have to put the emphasis back. We've been talking about it. Basically, we've been talking about education for most of this session. It's really about putting the emphasis on how you educate that person. For me to be able to share how I was raised, how I was taught to work, the things that I was taught to look for, just how, even down to how you speak. Which is something that's hugely important for me today. And I listen to this all the time, is how people are talking to each other. Mm-hmm. And I see such a hole in that game, just like yesterday, we're sitting at Whole Foods and you're asking the gal, and I could, before she even said anything, I knew it was going to be something that would somewhat make me cringe. Mm-hmm. Even though she wasn't directing her responses to me, she was directing them to you, man. But I cringed because I was like, I wouldn't have said that. Mm-hmm. There's no way in God's green earth I would have said what she said. Mm-hmm. It wasn't inviting. And I think that gets lost in all of that you're still trying to present something that's appetizing, even from a mental aspect. And that goes to training. And like I said, we're not talking about teenagers and college students. We're talking about people that are grown. That it's still in this dicey area in the customer service provider dynamic, that there's a missing piece there. And I'm like, I could see it 9 times out of 10. I can see it before it happens, and it's scary because that's my gift and it's also my curse, But I'm like, oh God, here we go. Yeah. Like, I actually don't want to. Like last night when that whole thing happened, and it wasn't a big deal, but it wasn't enjoyable to watch. Yeah. It just wasn't. And, like I said, I'm still scratching my head about because that's a place we go a lot, is that the whole Whole Foods experience. Because I said that to you, I think last night, man, this is a multi-billion-dollar, entity. And you don't know how to somebody hasn't taken the time to talk to your folks about how they deal with the conflict. Because conflict's always going to be there. Mm-hmm. But they seem to stub their toes week in and week out, and nobody's addressing it. I know we know the manager, and he's a really cool guy. But my question is, so what's your? I'm thinking, I start to back it up. What's his focus when it comes to his people? Because his people are a reflection of him, and that's what I start. Now I'm starting to look at not just them, but I'm starting to look at him. And like, what is, I could do, then I start to think, I could do your job. Then the other question is, but do I want to do your job? Mm-hmm. Because I don't know all the other dynamics behind it. What he's being mandated to do, what's his focus and his, org chart, on, his things to do list. What's the priority? For me, what I've seen, and from using this particular case model, I see an easy fix, but that's me. Another guy, somebody else might see something even entirely different, but to me, it's something that some training and some emphasis and a whole lot of conversation can put this thing back on the road. Because I'm telling you, sometimes when it manifests itself, it's kind of ugly to watch. Mm-hmm. And it definitely takes away from my personal experience when I'm patronizing this place. So that's something that I think is key. And that has always been my point is, that has always been something that is very important to me, how my people represent me as a person, but also me as an organization. And because I think that the dollars follow that. Yeah. I really do. And I think that a lot of people think, oh, we got, we got what we got. and they'll overlook it for a while. You know what I mean? In a lot of cases, they'll stop overlooking it when it becomes unbearable, or they get into one particular exchange that just basically sends them over the edge, and they're like, "I'm done. I'm not patronizing this place," or they selectively patronize this place, or they just stop altogether. Yeah. But to see, I mean, it's just, I see this time in and time out, day in and day out, and I'm like, am I the only one that sees this? Because this is crazy. This is just absolutely crazy.
Yep, I agree with you. So let me give you my perspective on it, and both of you shared some great points. I think from a culture standpoint, one of the things that we have to just remember at the end of the day is we are, as human beings, we have feelings, right? All of us. So whether you're a customer, whether you're an employee, whether you're management, there are feelings that are associated with everything. So getting to know that piece of it, as Vince was saying, they might not be having the best day, and why are they in this space? So getting to ask those questions so you have a better feel for who your people are as individuals. It's not just employee number 27. They're more than that. And I think companies do have to do a better job of making sure that they do those types of things. And then asking the questions of, as I said, is it a paycheck? Yes. But what is it you really want out of this job, this career, this company, today, tomorrow, next year, 5 years? And to bring those conversations into the fold as well, so you do get a better feel for what the mindset is. Because it changes my mindset when people start to ask me those questions, because I don't feel like I'm just employee number 27 when you start to ask those types of questions. So I wrap all of that up into something that I call, which is kind of falling off the table for what reasons I don't know, but what I call motivational fit. You have an employee, they have to have a certain skill set and the ability to do X, Y, and Z. But what is their motivational fit as an individual to fit into your organizational structure, your values, your goals, your mission as a company? So that's twofold, right? So now you as a company need to have clearly defined, clearly understood mission statements and values and goals and objectives that the company has. Now you need to go out from a motivational fit standpoint and not only find people that have the skill sets you need, but the best possible motivational fit for what it is you're trying to do as a culture too. So trying to marry all of that together is a challenge, but that's how I see it. And from a priority standpoint, figuring what those two silos are and then getting them together is, I think, the key component to it all. How that happens, that'll be something we can talk about as part of our next session, because as I said, this is part one. We'll be doing a part two where we dig a little bit deeper into some of the organizational structure things and some of the other things that we can start to do from an equity, equality, and other things standpoint to make your organization stronger. Final thoughts from either one of you. Anything that you want to share before we wrap up today?
All right. You go, Chris.
Well, I think really at the end of the day, for me, I always say that for me, it really, I have some goals and objectives. I think we all do. But the thing that I actually am trying to accomplish in, let's just say, we've talked about this, the back nine of my life. We'll get back to that. That's another discussion. But I'm really trying to be teacher, trainer, mentor, confidant. Those are the four things that I really try to accentuate when I'm bringing people on board. I've got people underneath me, people that are working for me. I'm trying to prepare them. I actually want, first and foremost, I want them to do the job that I'm hiring them for. But secondary to that is my belief system says you probably won't be with me forever. But so I want to do everything in my power to get you ready for the next step, the next stop in your journey. I want to equip you. I want to give you some new tools. I want to make you that more competent person and being that strong link in the chain of society. I know that might sound a little cheesy, but I honestly believe that. And that's what motivates me to get up on certain days, is that I get a chance to share something, share some experiences, um, good, bad, and the ugly. But I get to share it all with you, and hopefully that gives you an opportunity. Whoever this person is that's working for me, it gives them an opportunity to move as they move forward in life. They get a chance to hopefully do the same things, which is share some of those experiences. Um, I actually think that there's a little bit of a departure here. I have been having these thoughts lately about I used to be a horrible boss, and that's not what some employee told me. That's my own feelings. Like, because I went from being the guy that was a yeller, and it was a dictatorship type mentality. And I get it. It all can't be a democracy. You know what I mean? So let's be clear. Let's be clear on that. It cannot all be a democracy. But I really think that it's about creating the idea of teams and organizations that are trying to do something good and positive while making money.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Vince, what about you? What are your final thoughts for today?
For me personally, this is something that's obviously, as Chris was kind of alluding to, no, we're not all perfect, and no one in this realm talking about culture and values and leadership and defining, we're all trying to figure it out ourselves as we go through this. And I think the great thing about it is just knowing that we're not alone in this journey. And, that whole being vulnerable piece is really important. And there's a lot of really amazing groups out there that can support this. There's a lot of references. I dove really deep into the research side and seeing what else is out there. And I feel like for folks that are trying to figure out their own style, figure out their own culture, figure out their own values, and then how that defines into leading their professional life too, especially if you're in decision-making power, that's tough. So there's a reason why I was really attracted to, concepts like design thinking. There's a reason why I'm, in organizations and a part of leadership programs like HAPA and et cetera. And you just gotta know it. You gotta do your research. You gotta find out. You gotta find other communities. You gotta ask questions. And as you go through this all, just give yourself a little bit more room and kindness, because at the end of the day, we only have this kind of life, and we just have to enjoy it.
Yeah, 100%. Well, gentlemen, thank you both for joining. And like I said, this is part 1 of 2. I look forward to diving into the second half of this. And there's so much to talk about and to think about. It really opens your eyes to what can be done, what needs to be done. And, at our age and our stage and, some of the different things we are trying to accomplish, it really also, I think, brings a focus to how we can try to get more engaged, become more involved, and be more of an influence, move things in these directions of as what we've shared and talked about today. So I just wanted to wrap up with that and say thank you very much. It's been awesome. And until we don't have a confirmed date for part 2 yet, but we'll get that scheduled and we'll certainly get it publicized so the world knows. But until next time, I would like to say thank you guys for joining. Get out, enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we'll certainly talk with you soon. Take care of each other. Bye now.